Prime Minister, as usual, you would expect us to be on top of our brief. We know that you're on top of your brief, so we don't need the background to every answer. I'm sure you'll just answer the questions that we're asking, and if not, we'll chivvy you along. But I wanted just to start with you seeing what reflections you've got. You've been in post for a year now, and I wondered if you could give us a quick vignette, a picture of what you think the UK, what you want the UK to look like in 3 years' time after the first term or so of your premiership.
I want people to feel better off. And there has to be a central focus on living standards. I want them to feel, as they will, that the health service is working much better, is there for them and their families in a way that it hasn't been for many years. And I want them to feel safe and secure both in their immediate neighbourhood and as a country, both our borders and national security and defence. So they're the three things that I'm focused on more than anything else, those three things. I want them to feel that we've cleared up the mess that we inherited after the election. It was a huge mess because we had a broken economy and broken public services, and that we're on the road to rebuilding the country.
Okay, thank you. And what about child poverty? What would you like to see as progress on that?
Well, I mean, poverty and tackling poverty and breaking down barriers has to be central to everything that we do. People will not feel better off or safe and secure if we haven't tackled poverty. But I'm very clear in my own mind that we must tackle poverty by putting in the support that is needed, but also break down the barriers to opportunity, because otherwise we won't fix the very deep and complex causes of poverty, and that's why it's central to what we are doing. And it's not a one department issue, it's across all departments because it is so complicated and deep rooted, but it's got to be more than just support to deal with poverty as it is today, but also to put in place the measures to ensure that people can get out of poverty and stay out of poverty. And that's why, broadly speaking, the strategy we've adopted has four limbs to it. The first is to increase income, the money coming into people's pockets, if you like, into their household, to decrease costs to them, to strengthen the local support they have, particularly back into work, but in other ways, and to boost financial resilience. And I'm very proud of the fact that the last Labour government drove down poverty, and I'm determined this government's going to as well.
Keir Starmer entered this interrogation with one task: respond to the questions directly. No stagecraft, no shelter behind committees or delayed reviews, just clear replies. Yet what unfolded instead was a display of evasion. Again and again, instead of offering firm commitments, Starmer leaned on hazy reassurances, distant schedules, and bureaucratic excuses. The trend was unmistakable. When asked for substance, he offered sentiment. When pressed on poverty, he pointed to future reports. When challenged for immediate action, he spoke of eventual growth. But how did he deliver all this with a straight face? Let's examine it. Starmer had the opportunity to outline what Britain under his leadership might become, yet what he presented was an exercise in emotional comfort rather than concrete governance. He described success through how citizens feel rather than what measurable outcomes would follow. There were no statistics, no benchmarks, and no legislative blueprint, only promises of emotions. People should feel more secure, feel safer, and believe the NHS is performing more effectively. This is a strategy we've witnessed before, using optimistic but vague sentiments to sidestep policy detail. For a leader in office for over a year, with months of preparation, this lack of precision is revealing. It suggests either deliberate avoidance of binding pledges or a genuine shortage of solid plans.
Because one of the issues, Prime Minister, you may be aware, is that a number of landlords, including local authorities, are saying that they're struggling in terms of the funding and enforcement to carry out those necessary checks. We've heard that the courts, we know that there's a backlog in the courts in terms of residents bringing forward those cases. So just coming back to that enforceability, Prime Minister, as a lawyer, you know, for anything to be enforceable, it has to have the right protection around it. So just wanting to know if there's been discussions and that interdepartmental discussions to make sure that these cases are escalated when tenants bring them before the courts.
Yes, there have been. And one of the ways in which I've set up the work of government is to have key ministers on key commitments reporting in to me for a stocktake on a regular basis, where we go through progress, what measures are in place, etc. And housing, as you would expect, is one of those. There are 6 areas where we have these regular stock takes, and housing is one of them. So the Deputy Prime Minister and her team come into number 10. We have a session where we go through a number of different issues, but decent standards and housing and enforceability is among them.
He claims he wants citizens to feel more prosperous, that the health service functions far better, and to feel safe and secure, while speaking of clearing up the mess without specifying what actual policies would achieve these outcomes. Even when confronted on child poverty, he resorts only to generalities. Raise income, cut expenses, strengthen local support, build resilience, yet with no method or timeline. We already recognize one of the most revealing traits in Starmer's answers is how he sidesteps accountability by leaning on process instead of results. Rather than pledging concrete steps to repair broken housing enforcement or address legal backlogs, he retreats into management language about internal stocktake sessions. This is textbook bureaucratic diversion, deploying the jargon of efficiency to avoid promising substantive change. It reflects either a fear of overpromising or an absence of urgency for those living in unsafe, poorly regulated housing right now. That deflection weakens his broader narrative of citizens feeling better off, because no one feels improved when their rights rest on a system paralyzed by backlog.
Okay, you'll recall last time we met, Prime Minister, I asked you about the government's decision to freeze the local housing allowance, and coming back to the issue around child poverty. This is an area which is keeping many children and their families in poverty because they cannot afford the rent. The recent data from the local government association responsible for all councils shows that there's a funding gap of around £7 million over the last 5 years. This is a key area pushing many people more into poverty. So I asked you again, Prime Minister, do you think that that was the right decision from a government that's ambitious on tackling child poverty?
Look, I think I defend the decisions we've made. Obviously, we head into the autumn. We will get to another budget, and there'll be a chance to look again across the board. But we certainly made the right decision first time around. I think I'd also emphasise something I touched on last time, which is, in the end, with housing, we need to build and make available more housing across the board. There simply isn't enough, and that.
But the starts, Prime Minister, you may have seen are quite low. We're not building those houses quickly enough, and we will see more people and more children in poverty. We can't build our way out of this crisis. So in the interim, what more can the government do to help alleviate that poverty?
Well,
that families
as I
are
say,
facing?
there'll be a child poverty strategy which we're setting out in the autumn. We will go into the budget in the autumn as well, and alleviating poverty is a priority of mine. I do think that we need to build more, though, and we have to build more because we've had a problem for many years of not building enough social and affordable housing in this country. And until we crack that problem, we will never be able to get to the fundamental roots of the failures here. And that's why, on that issue in particular, I'm pressing the Deputy Prime Minister very...
You can see, Starmer stresses, senior ministers report back to him for a stocktake, housing among those issues, which gives the impression of progress but offers nothing for tenants facing urgent legal or housing crises. Starmer consistently frames long-term structural remedies as replacements for immediate support, and nowhere is this more visible than in his position on housing allowance. Freezing the allowance has driven families further into poverty, and instead of providing short-term protection, he reinforced the decision while claiming conditions will eventually improve once more homes are built. But construction takes years. Struggling households cannot wait for building projects. This highlights a deep disconnect between Starmer's pledges to reduce poverty and the urgency required to address policies that actively force people into hardship. His government is essentially telling vulnerable households to endure and wait, something that clashes with his vision of a Britain where citizens already feel better off.
On that very point, you'll be aware that there is still projections that your government has put forward that estimate 50,000 newly disabled people in April next year will be pushed into poverty because of the reduction in the UC health element of the bill. Now, you mentioned about getting more disabled people into work. Charlie Mayfield, who, as you know, is doing the Keep Living Working review, not to be published until later this autumn, Prime Minister, has said it will take several years before the labour market changes in order to allow more people to be employed, disabled people to be employed, but also to retain disabled people. So my question to you is, several years, 8 months, what are we going to do to mitigate against the potential pushing of another 50,000 people, disabled people, newly disabled people, and their families into poverty?
Well, I think the Mayfield report is coming in the autumn with the final recommendations, so we obviously need to look at that piece of work, and that is focused, as you know, on what employers can do. I don't accept that everything is going to take years. Some changes do take years, but not all changes take years, and we have to do work in the interim to give that support to those with disabilities.
What specifically had you in mind, given that we've had a disability employment gap for, well over 10 years?
Well, I think there's a lot of work can be done with employers to encourage them to take on and to retain. That doesn't need primary legislation. I've seen pilot examples of it across the country, which I'd like to see many more of, that have been very, very successful. So, yes, I accept that, if you want to pass legislation, it'll probably take some time. I don't accept that every change that is needed, some of them that I've seen for myself have been quite effective, don't need legislation at all, and I think we can get on with it.
Starmer defends the decision as correct the first time, redirecting the discussion to building more homes while ignoring the immediate funding gap and rising rent pressures. Before moving on, let us ask, are you enjoying this video? If so, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive coverage on the pivotal changes shaping British politics. Let's continue. When it comes to disabled people, Starmer's government is knowingly taking a gamble that will harm thousands. Cutting the UC health element is projected to push 50,000 newly disabled individuals into poverty next year alone. That is not speculation, it comes from his own government's data. Instead of addressing the immediate harm, Starmer leans on a forthcoming review and vague assurances of working with employers to retain disabled workers. This is a classic delay. Recognize the hardship, shift responsibility to a future report, and present small-scale employer schemes as evidence of progress. But for disabled families, this is not innovation. It is survival on the line. He insists not every change requires years, yet still offers nothing tangible that would shield those affected within the next 8 months.
Is the ambition that everybody in our society should feel better off in 3 years' time, including the poorest 40% of households?
Yes.
So you'll be aware of some quite troubling forecasts from, for example, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that says that, in fact, having looked at all the measures that the government's announced on the table by the summer, the bottom 40% of households are not going to be better off in 3 years' time. They're actually going to be £1,200 a year worse off. So what do you think needs to change between now and the end of the Parliament so that everybody in our society is, in fact, enjoying higher living standards?
Well, we need to do a number of things. The first is we've got to get much better growth into our economy and create more wealth in the first place. And that's why we've put so much store on ensuring that we took necessary measures at the budget to deal with our inheritance. We then had a spending review which was targeted across the country. This question of making sure that if there is a thriving economy, it's a thriving economy in every part of the country and not just in some parts of the country. And it's why we've already in the spending review focused on things like the living wage, the national wage, and the minimum wage, and ensuring that wages are going up. They've gone up more in the last 10 months. They went up in the last 10 years. So that's the first part. The second part then is the poverty strategy that has to ensure that this is across the whole of society and every location, because in addition, as you all know, to the growth figures, we've had inequality variances across the country, place by place, and we have to have a laser focus on that, because whilst we want more wealth creation and the economy to thrive, and we do and we will, We can't have that as London or South East and redistribution as a sort of one-word answer for the rest of the country. To my mind, that is fundamentally wrong.
When pressed, Starmer responded that we need to examine the Mayfield report. Not every change takes years, he argued. We must work with employers to encourage them to hire and retain. It's vague, centered on employers, and sidesteps reversing the cuts or adding immediate protections. Perhaps the most damaging blow to Starmer's story is economics. Independent analysis shows the poorest 40% of households will be £1,200 worse off within 3 years under his policies, despite his promises of people feeling better off. Instead of acknowledging this or announcing corrective measures, Starmer offers a familiar refrain: economic growth will resolve everything, and regional inequality will be fixed in due course. But growth is not a poverty plan. Without direct redistribution or short-term relief, growth typically expands inequality rather than closing it. By relying so heavily on future economic performance, he is effectively betting that households already on the brink will endure long enough for a tide that may never come. This is not a poverty strategy. It is political wish-casting. Starmer replies by saying, we must secure stronger growth for the economy. We've focused on measures like the living wage and minimum wage. Redistribution, he argues, cannot be the single-word solution for the whole country. It's aspirational language, but it does not challenge the forecast that millions will be worse off. So, what was this? A leader asked for clarity yet delivered only comforting phrases. Yes, promises were made, but most rested on feelings, future reviews, and distant hopes, not immediate action. If Starmer cannot provide direct answers when pressed, what happens when the stakes are even higher? Share your thoughts in the comments. Are long-term growth plans and endless reviews just excuses to delay genuine action on poverty and housing? Do you want more videos like this? If so, please like, share, and subscribe for more updates on British politics and the changes shaping it. Until next time, stay tuned.